So hello everyone. Today I would like to present my paper on the topic calculation of private product according to Rothbard approach. I begin my presentation with the starting points of our research. The gross domestic product introduced by Simon Kuznets in the early of 20th century was used by policymakers and economists like a key measure of economic growth and business cycle. But does GDP really represent the change in the real production? And does GDP truly reflect the change of behavior of economic agents? So the objective of our article is to discuss an alternative measure of private product proposed by Rothbard in his book America's Great Depression, and also evaluate private product in France during the last crisis. I will start my presentation with discussion about GDP. I'll quickly explain why GDP doesn't reflect the change in real production. Then I will present a Rothbard method, and then applying the Rothbard method to French macroeconomic data, I'll evaluate private product in France during the last crisis, and then we will discuss the result. The majority of goods in economy are produced by men, but there is no perfect indicator to evaluate all goods having value for customers, because all goods don't pass through the market, and all goods don't have the monetary the representation of their value. So the question how to measure real output was posed after the Great Depression, and GDP was introduced in France after the Second World War and also in Europe. And there is many constructive critical works on GDP presented by different economists of different sort of economic school, but we'll neglect these critics and we'll focus our analysis only on the main function of GDP to measure market value of real production. And we can conclude that GDP doesn't reflect the change in real production due to different factors. At the first, today, government sector represents a big part of GDP, this especially in Europe, especially in France. This figure varies between 27 and 57% of GDP in Europe, and government spending are evaluated by their cost of production and not by the market value. So this is very questionable from point of view of efficiency criteria. Their market value can be higher and lower than their cost of production. And there is no criterion which this is determined and can be known by economic analyst. So, moreover, the main part of public spending is financed by taxes that reduce real product and that represent a heavy burden for private sector. Firstly, in his book American Great Depression, Rothbard described the Great Depression from point of view of Austrian business cycle theory, but we focused on his method of calculation of private product proposed in the appendix of his book. This is a presentation of principal steps for private product calculation. So the first step is evaluation of gross national product and net national product using statistic data. It's easy. The second one is estimation of income produced by government administration and also government enterprises, represented by staff salaries. Then gross net private product is calculated as a difference between gross national product and the income produced by government sector. Then Rothbard estimates public expenditure of public enterprises. And then he estimates also government revenues and income of public enterprises. He considers that income public enterprises is equal to expenditure of public enterprises. And then he calculates gross private product, net private product remaining in private hands as the difference between gross net private product and government expenditure, total government expenditure of revenue if they are higher. So a tax burden is calculated as a ratio between gross private product and government expenditure or revenues if they are higher. The results obtained by Rothbard reveal the decline of private product in the United States during the Great Depression, and they reveal also the increase of tax burden during the Great Depression in the United States. So Rothbard method have some imperfections, and the main imperfection is using double calculation in his method. So he reduced twice the sum of government sector salaries from gross national product. And today, government sector is so big that we can obtain a negative result if we will apply if we apply French, for example, French macroeconomic data. To apply Rothbard's method should be reevaluated and corrected to apply to current macroeconomic data. We applying his method to French macroeconomic data during the last crisis, and at the first we calculated gross private product, net private product remaining according to Rothbard approach, and then we corrected this method and recalculated this indicator. So we can observe just that in 2009 GDP decreased. Government income, the estimation of government income is represented in table 2 and represented by staff salaries of government enterprises and public sector. So we added to this figure the income produced by Social Security, not existent during the Great Depression in the United States, but represented a big figure today in France. So we can just observe that government income increased through the crisis. We calculated private product in France as a difference between GDP and total government income. Then we estimated government expenditure of government enterprise, and we can conclude that government expenditures also increased through the crisis. It was possible due to the increase of public debt. So we calculated gross private product and net private product remaining, and we obtain a negative result. And it can be explained by double accounting used by Rothbard. So we calculated gross private product, and we obtained positive result, but the figure in 2009 is lowest, and it can be explained by consumption of capital during the crisis and the lack of resources to finish the projects that were started during the more prosperous period. So we calculated tax burden in France, and according to Rothbard's method, and also this figure is over-evaluated. But just one interesting fact, this figure during the Great Depression didn't exceed 30% in United States, and in France in 2010 it's 109%. We also recalculated tax burden in France, avoiding double accounting, and the figure are lower than 100%, but close to it. So in conclusion, we can conclude that it's impossible to evaluate all goods in economics. There is no perfect indicator to calculate monetary value of all goods. And Rothbard approach has some imperfection and should be corrected to apply to current macroeconomic data. We can also reveal the different behavior between private agents and public agents. So real output private decreased during the crisis, and government spending increased during the crisis. And in the same way that during the Great Depression, tax burden increased in France, and it's really important that tax burden decreases during the crisis, because it's a key measure of economic recovery and also the allocation resources in economy. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to Mrs. Peniaz. Madame Peniaz. Merci. Now we have some time to table some questions. I can already see some hands raised, so please go ahead and start the first one.
Thank you for your lecture. My question is, what is the value of all of these measurements if we're not attempting to centrally plan the economy? Why would we be interested in these measures if we're not a government which needs these kinds of things in order to make plans?
It's just like an alternative measure to GDP. So we can use GDP to do some empirical analysis, or, for example, to realize empirical analysis of Austrian business cycle theory. We need some indicators like to measure real output. So Rothbard proposed one. I recalculated it. It's just a research point, but you don't need this indicator to plan something. It's just a research point and an alternative measure of GDP. So Austrian perspective proposed another measure of GDP.
Please, another one.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask you, your data are in real terms or nominal terms? And the second,
real, sure, real. And Rothbard also used real, corrected to inflation.
Do you think that all the public expenditures are completely useless to the general public, such as education, healthcare, etc.? So therefore they should be deduced? The main point is that we cannot know it. We have no criteria to evaluate their monetary value. It can be completely unuseful. So to evaluate private product real, we remove that, according to Rothbard. And I think, yes, it's more logical to remove it, because we cannot evaluate, we cannot know if it's useful or not for customers.
This is our last presentation, our last speaker before the coffee break. But anyway, we still have time for the last question, if you want.
Another one.
The last one.
Hi. Are there also measures for the amount of or the type of capital or capital structure of the economy? Because this is like an income report for a company, right? And you also need to have like know the assets, and in order to have a full picture. Are there any measures for that?
If we would like to realize Austrian business cycle theory analysis, empirical analysis, you should have investment goods, sure, and customer goods, real product. So I think we can also calculate it and use only private sector product. Yes. But in this indicator, it's customer goods and capital goods are together, so it's no difference.
Well, if coffee break can wait, we can still listen.
Yeah, I would like to just make a short remark related to the last question. There is Mark Skousen is doing sort of balance sheet approach that tries to measure total output, including all the you know, the early parts of the triangle, not only the income, the last one. So he develops that methodology. So there is, yes, and it's relatively Austrian.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope that